So why don't we just get going here with episode 90 of the Stratosphere Lounge. And the first question, highest ranked question on our aviation show, was from Susan Speakman, who says, I would love to hear your thoughts on Amelia Earhart, her actual skills as a pilot, and her around-the-world trip. Well, anybody who's going to launch into a crossing of the Pacific Ocean with, essentially no navigation other than a compass, hoping to find a little speck in the Pacific, has my respect. I think it's been pretty much widely reported and pretty much true to say that she was not an exceptional pilot. A lot of close calls and a couple of dings and pows and stuff. But you have to really... The thing you have to factor into that is it's not a question of how was Amelia Earhart as a pilot, because, she maybe wasn't a very good pilot, frankly. But that's not what she was doing. What she was doing was she was setting frontiers and boundaries, and she was doing it at a time when women were in the kitchen. I mean, that was it. You could, if you were an unmarried woman, you might be a nurse or a teacher. And to have an aviatrix doing man stuff, and this is not long after Lindbergh's flight, 5-10 years after Lindbergh's flight, to have a woman out there in her cool little riding pants and her cool little bob haircut and doing everything the boys were doing is pretty revolutionary stuff, and it's important. And flying across the Atlantic Ocean is a big deal. Flying across the Pacific Ocean is insane. I'm getting a little comments. The mic is a little bit hot. I'll turn it down maybe a little bit because you never really know. I've got Bose headphones here, but sometimes on other speakers it may be a little tinny. So see if that's any better. Anyway, so you have to figure in what she did. So I think she was a remarkable individual. I think this actually, come to think of it, it's probably just monitor volume. I will take it down just a little bit. And with that said, what happened to her? It was a giant mystery for the longest time, and I think that mystery's pretty much been solved. I wish it had the research on it. The nice thing about the hive mind is I can just say something, and in 20 seconds it's going to be it's going to show up in the comments. Just before I go any further, is anybody getting this? A couple people have said I've got a bee in my mouth. Is it still buzzy? Because it sounds great to me. I took the volume down a little bit. I don't know. I'm not showing any signs. Well, maybe it's peaking a little bit. Let's try that. So anyway, there she is out there over the Pacific Ocean with no navigation system, no GPS, needless to say, no moving map display, no VOR, nothing. She's just out there with dead reckoning. And a lot of people think dead reckoning comes from dead as in not living, but dead reckoning actually comes from deduced. It's from deduced reckoning. Anyway, she's flying across the largest uninhabited area on Earth, the Pacific Ocean, trying to find a speck, which means that you can miss it to the south, you can miss it to the north, and technically speaking, if the weather's not good, you can miss it east and west. You can come up short, you can go long. It was obviously one of the great mysteries. A little more, we're getting on the mic. I'll take the volume down a little bit. It was one of the great mysteries for the longest time, and now I don't think it is anymore. I think it's pretty much been solved. There's a lot of evidence of wreckage from her plane, and I cannot remember the name of the island. I know I'll get it in 10 seconds. Somebody's going to come up with it. A little atoll in the Pacific, and they found parts of the landing gear strut that was looked like it was off of her plane. They found a little piece of like a perfume bottle that she had, other little fragments on this little island, this little atoll out in the middle of the Pacific. And there's one picture, this is really, really tantalizing. Somebody took a picture, I think it was like a destroyer off the island back in the 40s. And in that one photograph that they took, just a random picture of a random island, they didn't know that she might have survived there. In the 40s, there's a picture, and you can see a little bit of either wing or landing gear or something coming out of the water by the beach, but it's not there anymore. And over time, the tides and the currents and stuff would pull that wreckage out to sea. So, but there is indication that there was an airplane in the water. There's nothing there now, but there are bits of the puzzle, I think including human bones, that make it pretty compelling, almost certain in my mind. It looks like a lot of people said Howland. Somebody said it's Nicomoaro. That doesn't sound right, but it's Lord Teo said, yeah, the island is called Australia. She missed it. Wow. No, it wasn't Australia. Anyways, a little atoll, and a couple of people come up with something. But anyway, they found the wreckage, and not the wreckage. They found bits of debris that probably belonged to her, and it looks very much like she ran out of fuel, or was about to run out of fuel. Didn't make where she needed to make where their landing strip was. Found this little atoll, probably ditched intentionally. That's what I would do if I was low on fuel. If I knew I wasn't going to get where I was going, I'd want to fly the plane into the water while I still had some power, because as long as I got power, I can finesse the landing. And from where that plane appears to have come to a rest, if it turns out that World War II picture or whatever is accurate, then she did a really good job and got it right next to this island. And then the sad part of this is there's a pretty, again, from the debris that they recovered, some fairly compelling evidence that she actually survived the landing. Somebody survived the landing and made it to the island and basically just starved to death. I mean, there's really not much there. Howland Island sounds right. A little atoll with a big, hollow center, kind of like so many of those Pacific atolls, and not a lot of natural food on the island. You're probably going to need enough water from rainfall in the middle of the Pacific. But yeah, and she was, as a Hyperion team says, she was on the plane with her husband, navigator. I want to say it's Fred something, and obviously as well, Brian Williams was aboard, documenting the entire flight pretty much for NBC News. But other than that, that's about it. So, I'm not a big Amelia buff. It's not like I don't respect her. I respect her very much. But you have to understand the courage that it took. There's just look, I've flown a small single engine airplane to Catalina from LAX. That's 26 miles across the sea. And I climbed to about as high as I could go given the LAX airspace, and I flew over to about 8,000 feet. Now, glide ratio on that airplane is pretty good, so from 8,000 feet, split the difference 13 miles, you pretty much got to glide to either back to land or out to Catalina, back to the mainland. And I'm here to tell you, on a single-engine little airplane, 26 miles of open ocean, you feel pretty naked out there, Fred Noonan. You feel pretty naked out there. And so to be able to go out there in a twin-engine airplane, piston-driven twin-engine airplane, to not have any navigation aids, to not have continuous radio receiving, it's Niku Mararo, yeah, Niku Mararo. But the evidence is mounting and looks very good that she landed there, and probably they both survived the landing and then dragged some supplies ashore and probably just didn't get there. Yeah, Howland Island is where she was aiming. She didn't get there. There's not a lot of strange stories about the last transmission too. Some pretty compelling evidence that she certainly made a couple last transmissions that were recorded. And then there's a story about, I remember just from the depths of my memory somewhere, that some ham radio operator somewhere heard a transmission at about the right time and in the right frequency and so on and so forth. But it's obviously a tragedy, but it's the kind of tragedy you would want to have. I mean, if I'm a pilot and an explorer, I'd like to go flying and exploring. Check out that way. I don't suppose it was a very pleasant way to go. If it turns out that they did end up starving to death, that's pretty horrible, actually. But Amelia Earhart, so much of her appeal is the disappearance. And there's a weird sort of romance about it. It's the same kind of romance that you get with James Dean or Marilyn Monroe or anybody else who dies young. They're frozen in time at their peak, and that's how they're remembered, and they never get old, and they never get senile. They never say and do stupid things. I'm talking to you, Charles Lindbergh. Lindbergh, incredible feat of aviation, and just a remarkable man. And prior to the Atlantic crossing, Lindbergh was one of these first-generation male pilots, and these guys, I mean, I don't remember what the casualty rate was, but it was horrific. I mean, these guys were dying once a week. And Lindbergh did this amazing thing, and then, you know, after he's the most famous man in the world, the first real international celebrity, 1927, I want to say, for the Spirit of St. Louis, he goes on and, you know, goes to Germany and gets a big pat on the back from Hermann Goering and talks about how great the Nazis are and talks about, you know, how this is the wave of the future and, you know, and those damn Jews and you know, just completely tarnished his reputation. I'm not saying that Amelia Earhart had any of that in her, but it's something, you know, there's something, I'm not saying it's something to be said for dying young. I'm just saying that there's something that helps freeze the legend by freezing you in time at your peak. And she is the standard. I mean, she's the gold standard. It's easy for us to take for granted these days, you know, this equality between the sexes, but it just wasn't. It was just unheard of. It was unthinkable. And she proved that it was, you know, completely doable. Did a lot for women. Did a lot for men's attitude towards women. And in that regard, I'll say it was a much finer feat than this Billie Jean King, Bobby Riggs, talk about appropriately named guy, rigged tennis match back in the 70s that I remember, the Battle of the Sexes, where the number one ranked woman tennis player in the world beat the 50th ranked 20-year has-been, and it turns out he threw the game too. This kind of manufactured sort of self-esteem doesn't do much for me, but when you get down to Amelia Earhart, that's just raw courage. And it's more than courage, it's vision, right? I mean, it's one thing if somebody else, hey, we ought to send a woman around the world who wants to fly. But when you are the person who's got the dream and you have to find the funding and you have to find the aircraft and you have to plan the route and you have to make all the clearances and you have to just go around and do the work to make it happen, that's vision. And that makes her about as American as anybody I can think of anyway. You know, person had her own dream, their own vision, had something that they wanted to show to themselves and to the rest of the world, and she did it. So there we go.